because it also parallels basically to what happens with Mennonites in North America, in the United States, is that Mennonites end up thriving when there's a draft.
Oh,
Basically.
really? Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So you have both the sense of like people who don't want to go to war and all of a sudden like, oh, I'm a pacifist, and you belong to a religious tradition that like prevents me from going to war. And then also a sense of people like realizing that their faith means that they can't kill, and so they want to belong to a tradition that affirms that. So
Mm.
yeah, so Mennonites have done well under the draft, and so it's one of these things where like every once in a while a Mennonite will make a joke about like, well, church growth, I guess we need another draft. And he's like, oh, we don't want that.
It's funny. Howard was, I asked him one time at a talk what it would take to get a real anti-war movement again in the United States, and he said a draft.
Interesting.
So maybe that was his inner Mennonite coming out.
Yeah, totally.
Well, hey, I want to start this because I actually have
Let's go.
but it's been fun to catch up. So I'm going to kind of just do an intro because it's, a YouTube video. Hey, everybody, this is Isaac, and I'm joined by another Isaac Villegas, who some Wesley people should remember from our one-year sanctuary celebration last year. He preached. And Isaac, will you introduce yourself to folks? Tell us about who you are.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks for having me. Good to see your face and to chat. So I live in Durham, North Carolina, pastor Chapel Hill Mennonite Fellowship, just up the road here. Been here for 14 years. Been a member of the congregation before that. They called me to be pastor, and I guess they haven't fired me yet. So I'm still around. Also been a member of the governing board for the North Carolina Council of Churches. I don't know how long. Currently the president-elect. So I take a term as president in 2021. And yeah, trying to do the best I can down here with my little community of Mennonites to make North Carolina a place that is a little more just, a little more peaceful than it's been in the past.
Awesome. Oh, and tell us again about your, there's a big thing you left off of your impressive bio there. Tell us about the Christian Century gig.
Oh, Christian, yeah. So I've, right for Christian Century, I've been added to their column, their Faith Matters column. So I'm a columnist for Faith Matters, which means I write stuff related to our faith and our world, and trying to kind of make those connections, explore those connections.
Awesome. Well, people can check that out. Is it going to be like a monthly column?
So it is. So there's a rotation, I think, of 4 of us, maybe 5 of us. And I want to say Christian Century comes out maybe twice a month.
Okay.
So maybe like, I think I write once every other month or month and a half or something like that.
Great. That's awesome. Well, I like that I think you're an appropriate voice to talk about the connection between faith and the world. And that's part of what we're going to talk about today, because you and I are both pastors of churches where a migrant lives in sanctuary. And for people who don't know what that means, it means that, so in my context, Maria, an asylum seeker from Guatemala, received a deportation order and that she believed violated her rights. And so she came to our church to live in sanctuary while she fights for the protection of her rights in court. This goes back to a long biblical tradition. But I wanted to ask you, Isaac, because I've been reflecting on some of this myself, like what have, and feel free to share as many details about y'all's situation as you feel comfortable with, but in the midst of being a sanctuary pastor, how has that changed your theology? What have you learned as a pastor? What have you learned about the church? Anything along those lines? We'd love to hear it.
Yeah. I think the thing that has Well, I would say this: our decision to offer sanctuary, to invite Rosa Del Carmen is her name, the person who lives at church. Um, this decision was it was a pretty easy decision for our congregation to make. We thought that this is just what it means to live out our faith in the midst of this Trump regime. So when he was elected, we began conversations about what it would mean to what this is going to mean for our undocumented neighbors, community members, and we rent space from a Presbyterian church, and so we made an offer to them saying, "Hey, if we would love to enter into this partnership with you all to extend sanctuary to somebody. Here's what it would mean for us to do this together. Here's a covenant." And yeah, it was just a way to live out our faith right now. And I guess for me, what I've learned in terms of I guess maybe my theology is that that to have theological convictions takes a lot of work to implement them. So it feels like these 2 years since Rosa has been with us, I mean, we're just always organizing. I mean, we're organizing groceries, shopping, organizing laundry, organizing volunteers to stay there at church, provide accompaniment. So I guess maybe that passage where Jesus is like, yeah, we say all these things, but count the cost. Like, make sure you know what you're getting into. I feel that a little bit in terms of this commitment we made to Rosa and how it has just involved, I guess, like material commitments to our faith commitments. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's so huge. I think a lot of people in the abstract. I mean, I think a lot of people maybe live their faith in the abstract most of the time. And I think that when it finally comes time to put rubber to the road, there's not a great track record in Christianity of a lot of success. Not even the disciples, right? I mean, they certainly are the first people who have no idea what the cost is going to be. We have, Peter as sort of the ultimate example of this when he's like, yeah, I'm ready to get arrested. I'm ready to die. And
Yeah.
actually, just this past week in John 11, Thomas is basically an early foreshadowing when Jesus goes back to Judea to raise Lazarus. He's like, they're going to stone you there, and Thomas is like, well, I guess we should go with him so that we can
Yeah.
like die
Yes.
together.
Oh, that verse is so ominous. He's just like, it's almost like well, I guess this is I guess we die now. It's like,
Yeah,
wow.
it's kind of like it. Did not recall it. It hit me again when I read it this week. But so, what do you think? Well, actually, I want to back up because there's a difference between our situations that's a really important one, which is, for us, we just had one congregation because we have our own building to convince, but y'all had two. So what did that look like? Did you have different commitments than that Presbyterian church, and how did y'all discuss them?
Yeah, I think, well, definitely a learning for me has been how different congregations and different traditions have theological cultures matter, like ecclesial cultures matter, denominational differences matter, not just in the world of like, oh, we disagree about this, like, I don't know, baptism, and like whether or not like the age or whatever, like those sorts of things, but just in terms of like a culture of a way of being in the world, like we had to form a joint committee of the two congregations, and just to watch people from my church and people from this other church just try to figure out, like, well, how do you make a decision? Like, what counts as making a decision? Our congregation, we always make decisions by consensus, which is kind of a Quaker and Mennonite practice, whereas Presbyterians are very much about Robert's Rules of Order. I mean, that is like secondary to the Bible as Robert's Rules of Order and proper procedure. And so, just kind of like, okay, we need to make a decision now. What do we do? What counts as as determining everyone's on board. So yeah, so stuff like that was stuff we had to work through, but also just a sense of like that our congregations bring different gifts and different abilities, and what we brought to the table in terms of support was wonderful. Like, for example, my congregation has a lot more younger people, like predominantly people in their 30s and 20s, whereas the Presbyterian congregation, they're much older. What that meant was people from my congregation were able to like do overnight accompaniment in ways that like, oh, you know, it might hurt my back a little bit sleeping on this uncomfortable bed at church, but you know, you can get through it for the next day. Whereas if you're older, like that like ruins your month, you know, or like causes like some chronic condition or whatever. Whereas the people from the other congregation, a lot of them are retired, so they were able to be with Rosa during the day, whereas people in my church either at home with children or working. So I mean, that's one example where it felt like we were different congregations, and we were able to work together to provide for Rosa what she asked for and what she needed. So yeah, so I'd say that both in the sense of like learning the relationship, like how do these differences play out? What do we need to pay attention to? And then also realizing that our differences are gifts.
Yeah. Well, I know that any Methodist listening to this just got extremely triggered by the mention of Robert's rules, especially as we go through, you know, general conferences about extremely heated subjects.
Right.
Robert's rules has been a contentious element of those events, and there's been a lot of discussion about, you know, is this actually a theological way? Because Methodists love meetings so much that we call them holy conferencing. So
Awesome.
we're like, actually, can something be holy if Robert's rules are involved? But so far the Holy Spirit hasn't disrupted that, unfortunately.
Yeah, no, I've been watching and listening, meeting with friends about what's going on with you all, and yeah, I do not envy your situation, and this is going to be a tough couple of years here.
Well, you know, the saddest part is like everybody was kind of preparing for this, you know, for the divorce to become real in May, and now it's getting delayed a year by the coronavirus. So it's
Oh,
just,
really? Oh, I didn't
yeah.
realize that.
Well, because you know, it's global travel, you know,
Yeah, right.
and so it was supposed to be May 5th through the 15th, and you know, basically one of the first decisions they made after all this started was like, we just can't do this. So it's gonna, you know, like we were, I think in the, you know, in my annual conference, people were talking about, okay, churches split in June, and then in August we'll have another conference to kind of like assess the new reality and like realign and stuff. So all of that's going to get delayed by another 12 months, which, you know, just adds to I don't know, just creates the possibility for deeper wounds and more scarring.
Yeah. Maybe the Holy Spirit, maybe some room for the Holy Spirit, or no? Maybe
I hope
not.
so. I mean, you know,
Oh.
it's a valley of dry bones, or like a bunch of like stony hearts, and
Yep.
you know, we'll have to see. But so I want to ask one question, because you know, maybe our dynamics are similar, or maybe they're different. But I think one of the cool things for me about what I've learned theologically in sanctuary is just, you know, you were talking about like the material, you know, put the material cost of living out these convictions. I think a couple of things that I've seen are that that material reality has helped people better define their convictions, and in some ways like come closer to some of the things that I would say modern Christians sort of struggle with the most in America about what we believe as Christians, about like the resurrection, for instance. I hear people, and the incarnation, I hear people in my church talking about those things as like life-giving in a way that when I first got there, before we offered sanctuary, they sort of approached them with skepticism. And I don't, and they specifically say that they've learned that from worshiping with Maria, from
Uh-huh.
getting to know Maria. Um, you know, so I don't know. Have you seen anything like that? And like you talked about sort of a convictions to material thing, but have you seen it go the other way too?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, maybe this is maybe a deficiency in our like Anabaptist tradition, Mennonite tradition, is that we don't necessarily talk. Theological discourse is not something that we invest in too much. I mean, so historically, like Anabaptists and Mennonites were persecuted people who didn't have time to write theology. It was just kind of lived out. And I want to say that has become like a culture in terms of our what we do and how we think about church life, so that we do things that are like the working out of our faith without necessarily having to translate that into theological language. Does that make
Mm,
sense? Like,
sure.
so I can say I don't think that it is like this work of sanctuary has manifested some kind of change in our religious discourse and our language, theological language, and how we talk. Um, I do think, though, one way that it has affected our faith, how we organize church life, is as a congregation we've always rented space, because it's a newer church. We weren't you know here in North Carolina from the beginning of the colony, um, and so yeah, so our like my congregation is started in maybe 2002 or something like that.
I'm sorry, I'm
And
just
so
laughing at all of the history contained in that statement. Why weren't you there from the beginning of the colony? There's just like, oh, well, let me unpack 500 years of Reformation history. Sorry, go ahead.
right. Yeah, yeah. But we've always relied on the hospitality of other congregations. Um, Predominantly, I think over the course of the life of our congregation, a Quaker meeting, and then now this Presbyterian church. And so it has been very clear that um, we treat worship space, as always a guest. Like,
Mhm.
we're always into someone else's space. And that also means, I think, like, we take care of the space because we don't want to get in trouble. Like, we want to honor the landlord, and our rental agreement and all of that. That's important for the relationship. It feels like now what's happened is this sense of like this Presbyterian church has invited us into being like the space being ours as well, like into this posture of hosting somebody else, with Rosa. So I think that's changed our ability to recognize space as holy, actually, which is
Mm.
not a way we would have talked about it before. But now all of a sudden, we're talking about like God creating a sanctuary out of and talking about this sanctuary, this place, as being a sanctuary. So I would say that that's one thing I do think has shifted for us, is our relationship to our worship space, and seeing space as not just like a place where we meet every once in a while, but like actually holy, provide like being used for holy work.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, what's interesting when you say that is that I think in some ways, a lot of the ways the Methodists talk about space is typically with the language of idolatry. Like
Mm.
pastors especially are like, oh, my church is treating, this is not a comment about Wesley, this is generic pastor speak. I'm already like hedging my bets here. Um, like my church is like treating this building as an idol or something like that, or like
Okay.
these contentious fights about like carpet in the sanctuary, or there was a
Mhm.
long drawn out battle in the Methodist church about screens in the sanctuary, or
Oh, wow.
what, all of this stuff that I think that, but I don't think it's ever around this question of like holiness, is because I think that most Methodists have probably been thought like, have either not really reckoned with that or been taught very intentionally by sort of a influx of evangelical culture to think about like, that campfire song, Lord, prepare me to be a sanctuary.
Hmm.
So I think that what's interesting to me though is that most of the time that I recognize people connecting with sanctuary language, and maybe before this, is like talking about nature. Um, and I know that you've written some about creation recently. What do you think the connections are there about the holiness and I don't know, do you see a bridge between those ideas? We have these wildlife sanctuaries, we have designated places where we kind of let nature be. Certainly those are embattled all the time. But I don't know. I think that when we're talking about Protestants and holy space, we have a pretty, kind of desiccated language around that because of the whole history of pietist movements and things like that. So I think it's been a challenge for us too to think about places holy. But what do you make of all that?
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good way of thinking about the history of it too. I think for us, just in turn, as I'm thinking about this now, I don't think I've thought, yeah, this is what a nice thing about like talking to somebody about experiences, because like, I don't process things just on my own. I don't keep a diary or a journal about my thoughts. So this is helpful. But I do think that like one of the significant things was listening to Rosa and other people in Sanctuary talk about the holiness of a place, being like,
Mm,
this place is like kind of saving my life right now. And it's like a provision from God, like this gratitude to God for like a place. And I think that has affected our language. Yeah, in ways that very similarly, uh, as Mennonites, yeah, holiness of place is not something that's natural for our church discourse. There's what a very prominent passage, a psalm in Anabaptist Mennonite history and church life is Psalm 24, which opens, "The earth is the Lord's and the fullness therein."
mhm,
That has been a passage used, quoted by Mennonites since forever, because it is a way of claiming that, like, two things. One, that the earth, the land, the seas, the rivers, the cattle, the harvests, they don't belong to the princes. They don't belong to the lords. They belong to God. So stop trying to claim these things for yourself. So early forms of communitarian living in Europe. But then it also became a significant passage for Mennonites as they fled, and Anabaptists as they fled persecution. So the sense
mm,
of like, wow, this is my home. How am I going to be able to like live in a foreign land? Like I have no idea. Like moving to North America, what's gonna, or to Paraguay, or all the places that Anabaptists and Mennonites settled. Um, but that passage became significant again, saying like, oh, no, the whole earth is the Lord's and the fullness therein. In the same place that God made a place for me here in my homeland, God's going to make a place for me wherever God sends me. So I want to say that, like, in general, there is, like you're saying, among Methodists and maybe among Protestants more general, this appreciation for the earth, creation as God's sanctuary, that we have as well, but now it's become a little more specific in the way that our church space. Um, yeah, now that I think about it, like there's so Mary Douglas back in the day, anthropologist, also biblical scholar, explored Levitical law about how holiness, there's always this play of purity and danger,
mm,
and the sacred becomes, it's like, oh, this is sacred, which is amazing. It also means you better be careful. um,
yeah,
and it feels like that there's something about that too in terms of now our church space, where like, hey, this is a space for Rosa, like, it's her space, like she makes food, she has friends, we commute, like all of that. And it's also just like, and like, we need to guard this space. This is protected space. This is holy space. We need to make sure that like this space is also safe. So it feels like both of those things are going on now in terms of my experience of even like going to church. Like, it's like, okay, are those suspicious cars? Like, that's not ICE, is it? Or, I mean, early on, I was like driving around the block, like looking like, okay, is that a nice vehicle? Why are they stopped there? They've been there for like 2 minutes. What's going on? Like, oh, they're only on the cell phone, or, oh, they're just looking at their whatever. But like this sense of all of a sudden danger lurking around this site of holiness became very real.
Yeah, you know what's I mean, it's interesting. I think now you're challenging me because it's making me think about a lot of text where um I think even what people offer into those spaces can be like accepted or rejected by God, and in scriptural text, from like priests setting the wrong type of fire on the altar to to like falling and touching the Ark of the Covenant, or Ananias and Sapphira,
Yeah,
like
right.
withholding offering. I think that those are things that I think are actually extremely practical for every church, and yet are deeply, like, just by the nature of congregational life, especially lay leadership. And I mean, God only knows. You get into the Catholic side of that, but we won't. But just I think that play of things has been interesting because I think that it's kind of Maria's presence in our church in a lot of ways, I think, has decentered some traditional like leadership things, especially for me as a pastor, like trying to look to Maria to be the leadership of her own fight, the leader of her own fight, like the voice of her own of her own story. I think everyone's kind of just sort of recentered around the priority in life of someone else. And I think it, in some ways, to me, the reality about figuring out what's holy and what faith actually looks like, um, I always think that, we say this in the Lord's Prayer every week, but like the more you practice something, the easier it is to offer in other places. So I think that like
Mm.
the more we, for instance, like the more we forgive debts or something like that, the easier it's going to be to like forgive loved ones or receive forgiveness from loved ones, and reconcile with family tension, or even enemies. And but I think without that practical reality where we find service, um I think a lot of these things can go unsaid even though they're present in really powerful ways. And I've been thinking a lot about, what are the best ways to kind of pull those discussions to the surface. Yeah, I don't know where that was going. I'm kind of rambling at the moment, but I mean, I think that ultimately, when as we continue down this path, the sanctuary movement as a whole, it's pretty small right now in the United States. Like 50 churches are offering sanctuary or something like that number. What would you say? Do you think there should be more? Do you think there should be less? Like, what has this experience taught you about this movement going forward?
Yeah, I would say early on, like I was inspired by what happened in the 70s and 80s with the sanctuary movements for Central Americans, and I thought that that was like that shaped the political world, in this country. And so in my mind, I thought to myself that like, here's another opportunity for that. And I still don't have a good analysis as to why it didn't work this time. Like you're saying, it didn't really take off. Um, and I mean, I have guesses or whatever, but I just haven't put together a good comprehensive analysis as to why it it hasn't worked on a national scale to shape political discourse in ways that it did in the 80s. Um, Obviously, like caring for the people God sends in our lives is like priority, no matter what kind of political change it causes. So like for you all, Maria, for us with Rosa, like it's mattered, like it's mattered for their lives with their families. And um, so yeah, so um, I I know that early on, when Trump was elected, there was a lot of people trying to figure out if this was an option for them, undocumented folk who were like, what are we going to do? And then there was like, 3 years of quiet. I hadn't heard any more requests, at least down here in North Carolina. And then now in this final year of this hopefully only term, first term, maybe, I don't know, of this president, there's been a few more requests for sanctuary. So I think right now, the desire for sanctuary is, it's a short-term thing where people are like, hey, I can live in a church for 9 months, 6 months, hopefully the last 6 months, 9 months of this president, so that so everything changes come January, and then I can have my life again. Instead of early on where it was like a long haul, like, hey, be prepared to stay in here for 4 years at least, and that's a lot to ask. So I feel like there's more interest in it recently, just as a short-term situation. But again, like, I don't see it as shaping political national discourse. Do you know why? Do you have a sense? Do you have any kind of analysis?
Well, I mean, I do have a hypothesis. I don't know if I know the history of the 80s and 70s sanctuary movement well enough to make a comparison. So I'll just say that my thought is that I mean, I think one of my frustrations has been that the national conversation is so short. Its attention span is like so minuscule that even when we've had things like the ice fines last summer that have gotten some momentary national attention, it's like here for a second and then gone. And the family separation protest that brought out several thousand people in Charlottesville, 3 months later there's a person living in sanctuary in their church. We don't have thousands of people helping. We could use that, but we just don't have that reality. So I think that on some level, I mean, I think for the sanctuary movement to, say there is another term of Trump, or honestly, I don't think that any president is above, as we saw with Obama, like the sort of deportations and everything that happened then. I don't think regardless of party, the politics of all this are extremely complicated in Washington. But I think that without some sort of concerted protest movement alongside of sanctuary, I think it kind of dies on the vine as far as people's interest goes, and as far as advocacy for those people go. Because I think my experience has been it's such a huge effort to keep just the daily stuff going that we just don't have the bandwidth to have a consistent sort of advocacy arm, like kind of like fighting that battle on the other side as well. And I think that's like right now we've been waiting on the Board of Immigration Appeals to get back to Maria for like a year, and it's just kind of like, okay, well, what leverage do we have to speed this up? And it's been very difficult to catch the attention of even political leaders in our state. Tim Kaine's staff were like, we'll get back to you when we're doing comprehensive immigration reform, and we need Maria's story, but like, she's a person who needs help now.
Yeah.
And
well,
so
that's a good point. I mean, yeah, go ahead.
No. Well, I was just going to say, I think without that kind of, there needs to be two bits to the solidarity with these people, right? Like one focused on just helping them and keeping them safe, and the other like sort of the widow and the unjust judge, like doggedly going to people in power and saying, give me justice,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I think that's a good point about what's missing now. The thing you mentioned earlier about attention span and news cycles. So yeah, so like those fines. What was Maria's fine? How much money?
I think it was $270,000.
Okay, yeah. So for Rosa, it was 314,000. And then like a number of other, 7 other people in the United States.
Yeah, I think the person in Colorado had almost 500.
Yeah. So that news came out, and like within a half a day, I was getting phone calls from like the New York Times person, all
Yeah.
these people. I didn't, I have no idea how they got my number. They did reporter things and figured stuff out, but so much attention to that. For like that whole week, maybe 2 weeks, people wanting to come to church to interview Rosa, what she was going to do with $300,000 fine, and then that died away. So recently, Rosa got good news. So the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals granted her appeal, and they removed her deportation order. This is like huge. And they ruled that, which was precedent setting. They said that the government. So Rosa, she fled Honduras because her partner tried to kill her. So it was a domestic violence intimate partner, which is like so. That is the case in her country.
Yeah, it's the highest rate of femicide in the world.
In the world, yeah, right, in the world. Horrible. And so what she won, it was like this precedent-setting decision, because it now says that the government must prove that a petitioner, so someone like Rosa who's filing for some kind of status, leaving a domestic violence situation in Central America, it's the government's responsibility to prove that that person will be safe if they were returned to their country of origin.
Wow.
That is very hard to prove.
Yeah.
So this is like good news, for like so many people in Rosa's situation. This is such good news for women who are like fleeing violence, like this is going to change a lot of people's lives. I reached out to so many reporters, like the same reporters who contacted me about the fines. No one covered it. No one was interested at all. And I was just, I just couldn't believe it. I'm just like, we're talking about real people's lives. We claim that we care about violence against women, as this like global phenomenon that needs to change. So we care about all of that. But the thing that makes national attention is the news story about money, not about someone's violence against women. Like that's just not newsworthy. Yeah.
Well, and I think that what's even more frustrating for me, because we had a similar sort of outpouring, the Global Methodist Church released a letter last August that was like, we need to be in solidarity with all of these, with these 9 Methodist churches who are offering sanctuary, naming Wesley and Maria as one of them. And we got this incredible number of cards from all over the country that, of people saying that they had seen and heard and all this stuff. And yet I think that, well, I think there are a couple of things about it. It's so funny. I think reporters, when that happened, I could watch them ask Maria, well, how are you going to pay this? And she's like, are you joking?
Yeah, right. Exactly.
I think
Rosa was translating that the money into how many pupusas that she would have to make and sell. Whenever the reporter would ask her, she'd be like, I think that's about so many, some absurd number of pupusas.
Yeah, I mean, but it's just I think that even there, what they want is Maria to basically put a middle finger up to Trump, and that puts her in an extremely dangerous situation. So here she is, these reporters are trying to use her as bait for Trump to tweet or something. And I think that I don't know. I mean, I don't know, Isaac. I don't know what it's going to take for people to inconvenience themselves to enough on the behalf of someone else. I think that I've been I don't know. I mean, I guess that there's a lot to lament, but also a lot to celebrate in sanctuary at the end of the day, because there's been an incredible commitment from very faithful people that have made this happen and have helped keep Maria safe, and not to mention her own bravery and courage and strength during all of this. But at the same time, it's been sometimes really frustrating and lonely to be in this fight. And I don't know what the future of that looks like, but to me, having spent time at the border, and this is probably another conversation for a different time, but like especially with climate change, um, I think that this is not going to go away. And in the short term, it may not go away because we may get 4 more years of Trump, but in the long term, it's definitely not going away. So the church is going to have to like do some hard sort of theological work, I think, to kind of say, what does an actual commitment to this look like in a way that's like not just sort of protective, but like liberatory. And I think
Right.
that,
Yeah.
and to me, that's kind of the fundamental question. How do you reframe a sanctuary movement to make it like not just about providing that space, but also providing like an intense and focused advocacy on the other side of it?
Yep. I agree.
Well, Isaac, this has been awesome. I think this is probably a good place to stop, giving people some food for thought. But is there anything you'd like to plug or share with people in the midst of everything that's going on?
I'm no, not really. Just yeah, gratitude for the conversation. This has been great. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for this way of connecting in the midst of this crisis.
Yeah, it's good to see you too. And we need to start like a pastor club for Isaacs. We need to. Who are the other Isaacs
Yes,
out there
yes.
in ministry?
I know one other Isaac. I know one other Pastor Isaac. So yeah, we should invite him.
All right.